The Empire had always seen humans as nothing more than an insignificant blip in the galactic landscape, a race barely capable of survival in the vastness of space, but now they had made the mistake of underestimating the one species that refused to be crushed beneath the boots of the Empire. For too long humanity had suffered under the ruthless tactics of the Empire, their colonies burned to ash, their people slaughtered in brutal ways, every attempt to fight back met with failure and destruction. But even in the face of extinction, humanity's spirit refused to break, and now it was time to take the fight back to the Empire. Across the stars, the Blackstone name was whispered in fear, and awe, a name synonymous with death and vengeance. Summus Blackstone and his wife Lilith had carved their reputation across the galaxy as the deadliest bounty hunters to ever exist. Their contracts had taken them to the farthest reaches of space, hunting criminals, slavers, and warlords. But now their skills were being called upon for a far more dangerous mission, a mission to save humanity from the jaws of the Empire. It started with a simple transmission from the Earth Council, an urgent message delivered in the dead of night. The words were few, but the meaning clear. The Empire had crossed the line. They were not just waging war against the human colonies anymore. They were hunting humanity to extinction, and the Council was willing to risk everything to stop them. But they needed help, not from military generals or diplomats, but from a pair of bounty hunters who had never failed a contract. Summus had received the message while aboard his ship, the Seraphim in the outer rim, his eyes narrowing as he read the words, his fingers tracing the screen with a cold determination, his mind already working through the plan. The Empire had made a grave mistake, underestimating the tenacity of the human race, but they had made an even greater mistake by thinking they could hunt down the Blackstones. He stood up from his seat and turned to Lilith, who was quietly cleaning her weapons. As always, her expression unreadable. The deadly calm she carried was the very reason they had become legends together. She was his equal and his partner in every sense of the word. They shared a bond forged in battle and blood. They think they can wipe out humanity, Summus said, his voice low and dangerous. We'll show them what happens when you push humans too far. Lilith looked up, meeting his gaze, her eyes cold as ice. We'll make them regret it, she said, her voice a perfect echo of his own resolve. The decision was made in that moment. Without hesitation, the Blackstones would go to Earth. They would take the fight directly to the Empire's heart, and they would make sure humanity had a fighting chance or die trying. The Seraphim rode to life and set course for Earth. Their mission was clear: to take down the Empire's war machine piece by piece. But the stakes had never been higher. With every world they visited, they saw the destruction left behind, the bodies of innocents burned beyond recognition, entire cities reduced to rubble. The Blackstones had seen war, but this was something different. This was genocide, and they would not let it stand. Their ship sliced through the vastness of space toward the Council's meeting, coordinates their destination, Earth, the cradle of humanity, the heart of everything they were fighting for. As they approached the planet, the weight of the mission finally sank in. Summus glanced at Lilith and saw the same grim determination mirrored in her eyes. This would not be a simple contract. This would be the most dangerous fight of their lives, and no matter the cost, they would make sure the Empire learned the true meaning of fear. The Blackstones were coming, and the galaxy would soon know their wrath. The Earth Council had never been one for rash decisions, but now they were on the verge of desperation. When Summus and Lilith Blackstone's names reached their ears, there was no longer time for hesitation or diplomacy. The last human colonies were on the brink of extinction, and they needed every ounce of strength they could muster. But they didn't know whether to trust a pair of mercenaries who had never sworn allegiance to anyone except their own code of survival. Inside the council chambers, the debate was fierce, the room filled with tension and urgency, voices shouting across the table, some arguing that sending two bounty hunters to confront the Empire was nothing short of madness, others saying it was the only chance they had left. There were no military heroes left to turn to, no fleet that could face the Empire's might, not when entire fleets of their ships had already been obliterated by the Imperial war machines. In the midst of this chaos, a figure walked into the room. His presence silenced the entire chamber. The door opened with a hiss, and Summus Blackstone entered, flanked by Lilith. The couple's reputation preceded them, but none had ever seen them face to face. The very air seemed to crackle with the weight of their reputation. The Blackstones were legends in the underworld, mercenaries, feared by criminals and bounty hunters alike. They had earned their name by conquering the deadliest contracts with ruthless precision. The council members stiffened in their seats as Samus's icy gaze scanned the room. His face was calm, but the edge of violence hung in the air around him. It was clear that he didn't care for the council's deliberations. His focus was entirely on the task ahead. Lilith remained silent as ever, her eyes scanning the room with an unreadable expression. She was a ghost, a shadow waiting to strike. Without a word, Samus walked to the center of the room, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm here because the Empire is about to finish what they started. Humanity's colonies are being wiped out one by one, and I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen to Earth." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but Samus's words held them captive. There was no denying the urgency of the situation. The Empire had already slaughtered too many, but they had failed to realize that the Blackstones were not like the rebels who had fallen before them. "We can't trust mercenaries," one of the council members protested. "This isn't just about money, this is the future of humanity." "Trust." Samus's voice was low but razor-sharp. "You think you have the luxury of trust right now? The Empire doesn't care who you trust. They will burn this planet to the ground, and you'll be left with nothing but ashes. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to kill the people who want you dead, and I'll do it whether you trust me or not." Lilith stepped forward, then her voice as quiet and deadly as a whisper. "We don't need your trust, we need your resources." Her eyes met those of the council. "Give us what we need, and we'll end this." Her words were final. No more debate, no more hesitation, just the cold certainty that she was already calculating how they would bring down the Empire. The room fell silent as the gravity of her statement settled over them. Samus and Lilith were not asking for permission. They were telling the council what would happen if they didn't act, and the council knew there was no other choice. The Blackstones were their last chance. The meeting ended quickly. The council gave the Blackstones what they needed: a ship, a full arsenal of weapons, and whatever support they could spare, knowing full well that sending 2 bounty hunters into the heart of the Empire's war machine was their only hope for survival. As the Blackstones left the room, their mission now clear, the weight of the task ahead settled heavily upon them. But they knew that there was no turning back. They would burn the Empire to the ground or die trying. Their names would echo through the galaxy, not as mercenaries, but as the ones who had given humanity its chance to rise again. The seraphim cut through the black void of space like a blade through silk, its sleek hull palely visible against the endless darkness as Samus and Lilith stood side by side at the bridge, their eyes focused on the holographic map of the galaxy stretched out before them. Their next target was a high-ranking Imperial officer, a man named General Orlak, responsible for the genocide of multiple human colonies. His crimes had left entire worlds in ruin, and his name had become a symbol of the Empire's merciless oppression. But the Blackstones weren't here for symbols, they were here for blood. Lilith's fingers traced over the control panel in front of her, her expression as unreadable as ever. Samus stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He hadn't spoken a word since they had left the council chamber. Both of them were lost in the gravity of what lay ahead. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. But for Samus, this wasn't just another contract, this was personal. The Empire had killed too many, and this time they would feel the full weight of his vengeance. General Orlak's flagship is stationed above the world of Cirrus 7. Samus finally spoke, his voice cold and deliberate. "It's a heavily guarded system, but we can get in undetected if we approach from the outer rim." Lilith nodded without looking up, her mind already working through the plan. "The station has a cloaking field. We'll need to disable it before we can get close enough to board." Samus glanced at her, knowing she had already calculated how to get past the Empire's defenses. It was why they worked so well together. While he handled the brute force, she took care of the strategy and the subtlety. No one had ever been able to track them once they entered a system, and no one ever got away once they were on the hunt. "We won't be able to take on the whole fleet," Samus continued. "We'll disable the cloaking field, then slip past the outer defenses to get on board the station." Lilith's eyes flicked to him, a faint spark of something in her gaze, something almost like amusement. "You mean we won't take on the whole fleet?" She corrected him with a hint of a smirk. Samus let out a low chuckle. "Right," he said, his voice darkening. "But we won't have time for much more than a quick strike. Once we're inside, it's not just Orlak. We're after there are others who need to pay for their part in this too." The two of them were already planning the carnage to come while the rest of the galaxy slept, unaware of the storm that was about to hit their world with lightning speed. The Seraphim made its way towards Sirius 7, moving in silence like a predator closing in on its prey. As they neared the planet's orbit, the tension in the air grew thick. Samus stood up and motioned to the hologram in front of him. "We'll launch the EMP from here. That'll disable the station's cloaking field." He turned to Lilith. "You ready?" Lilith didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. She simply reached for the weapons compartment and began selecting her gear. She was a machine of death, and when she moved, there was no hesitation. Her movements were smooth and fluid, every motion calculated to end lives. The Seraphim dropped out of warp 1,000 miles from the Imperial station, a tiny speck of metal against the vastness of space. They had to get in close enough for the EMP to have an effect without triggering any alarms or drawing attention from the Imperial fleet. Samus's fingers hovered over the controls as he stared at the station, looming ahead, a fortress in space. It was surrounded by a ring of Imperial ships and fighters, patrolling the area, but the Blackstones were never seen until they wanted to be, and when they were, it was far too late for anyone to stop them. The countdown began, and Samus and Lilith shared a single glance before the Seraphim dropped into the station's outermost defense grid, cutting through the darkness like a knife, leaving the Empire clueless until it was too late. The EMP went off with a silent pulse, and in an instant the station's cloaking field dropped. They were visible now, but it didn't matter, because by the time the first Imperial fighter moved to intercept them, the Blackstones were already on their way in. Samus stood ready, Lilith beside him, both of them prepared for the bloodbath ahead. The Empire was about to learn that when the Blackstones came for you, there was no escape. The chaos erupted in an instant as the Seraphim tore through the outer perimeter of the Imperial station. Samus's hands moved with lightning precision, guiding the ship through the asteroid field and debris as Imperial fighters scrambled in vain to intercept them. The Blackstones had already disabled the station's cloaking field, and now the hunt was on as they hurtled toward their target. Inside the station, alarms blared, red lights flashing as the crew scrambled to react. They weren't prepared for an assault of this magnitude, especially not from two figures known for turning the most secure military installations into tombs. Samus and Lilith had come for blood, and nothing would stand in their way. As the Seraphim docked inside the station's base, Samus moved first, without hesitation, his boots hitting the cold metal floor of the docking bay. With a resounding thud, Lilith followed him closely, her eyes scanning the shadows, her every step calculated. She was the quiet storm that followed in his wake. Both of them were perfectly in sync as they moved through the station like ghosts, their weapons already in hand. The first wave of Imperial soldiers appeared within moments. They were unprepared for what was coming. Samus roared as he stormed into them, gunning down the first few with quick, lethal shots, his heavy blaster tearing through the air with deadly accuracy. The sound of his weapon was like a death knell echoing down the station's corridors, while Lilith was already on the move, taking out another group of soldiers with a series of swift, brutal strikes, her blades slicing through armor like paper, her movements so fluid and precise that she left nothing but blood and bodies in her wake. The two of them were a deadly dance of destruction, a storm of violence that no one could anticipate or survive. They moved through the station with terrifying speed, cutting down anyone foolish enough to stand in their way. And as they advanced deeper into the heart of the station, they came face to face with the station's first line of defense, an elite squadron of Imperial soldiers trained for just this kind of threat. Samus grinned as he readied his weapons. Lilith's eyes gleamed with cold intent, and together they stepped into the heart of the ambush. The Imperial soldiers didn't even have time to react before Samus tore through them with his blaster fire, while Lilith danced among them like a phantom, her blade cutting through flesh and bone with surgical precision. One soldier tried to fire at her, but she was already gone before he could even pull the trigger. Her dagger appeared out of nowhere and buried itself in his throat. She moved, without making a sound, as if the world bent around her presence. The soldiers dropped like flies, each one eliminated with deadly efficiency before they had a chance to call for reinforcements. "Too slow," Samus muttered as he holstered his blaster and moved to the next hallway, his voice a low growl as they continued their relentless charge deeper into the station. The further they went, the more desperate the Imperial forces became. They called in heavy reinforcements and set traps along the way, but it didn't matter because Samus and Lilith were never caught off guard. They knew every move before the enemy made it, and no amount of Imperial strategy could stop them. They reached the command center soon enough. Orlak's personal guard awaited them, ready to make their stand, but Samus and Lilith didn't slow down for a moment. They charged straight into the heart of the final line of defense guns, blazing and blades flashing. Samus took the front, tearing through the guards with wild abandon, while Lilith slipped past the chaos like a shadow, taking out targets with unerring precision and deadly silence. It was a massacre. The guards never stood a chance, and when the last of them fell, Samus and Lilith stood in the center of the blood-soaked room, their eyes locked on their true target. General Orlak had been watching from the far corner of the room, his face twisted in disbelief and fear. He had never expected the Blackstones to be this relentless, this savage. He had thought that even the Empire's might would be enough to crush them, but now he realized just how wrong he was. "You're too late." Orlak spat, his voice filled with venom as he backed into a corner, his hand reaching for a hidden weapon, but it was already over before he could draw it. Samus's blaster roared, and the general crumpled to the floor with a final, gurgling scream, his life snuffed out in an instant. Lilith stepped forward, her expression unreadable, as she looked down at the body of the man who had been responsible for the deaths of thousands. But there was no satisfaction in her gaze, no triumph, just the cold knowledge that this was one more step in their war against the Empire. "There's more to do," Samus said, his voice low, as he holstered his weapon once more. Lilith nodded as she turned toward the exit. The station was in chaos. Now the Blackstones had done their work, but the Empire would never stop coming, and they would be waiting for the next fight, ready to bring their wrath to every corner of the galaxy. As the Blackstones made their way out of the station, the alarms continued to blare, but they were already several steps ahead. The Imperial forces would soon be in full retreat, or worse, scrambling to contain the damage they had unleashed upon their fortress of command. Samus and Lilith didn't waste time looking back. Instead, they moved with ruthless precision through the corridors of the station, their mission now complete, but their war far from over. Their ship Seraphim awaited them in the docking bay the moment they stepped through the airlock. They were already planning their next move. Samus checked the systems, the coordinates already programmed for their next destination. Another high-ranking Imperial officer. This one had a reputation for being even more brutal than Orlak, a man named Vorik, who controlled several key systems in the Outer Rim. His reach extended into the heart of human territory, and his methods of subjugation were well known across the galaxy. But the Blackstones weren't intimidated by names or power. They were hunters, and Vorik was no different than the rest of the Empire's puppets. Samus's jaw tightened as he sat in the captain's seat, his fingers moving over the controls. "We'll hit him where it hurts," he muttered to himself. Lilith stood in the shadows behind him, her eyes scanning the galaxy map as she thought through their strategy. Vorik controls 3 key systems. We'll need to take out his supply lines, first take away his resources, and his fleet will crumble. Samus nodded as he adjusted their course toward the first target, a system controlled by Vorik's forces. It was a mining world heavily fortified with Imperial defenses, but that only made it more appealing. The Blackstones thrived in chaos and destruction. This mission was no different. The journey would take a few hours, but the Blackstones never rested. Their weapons were cleaned and prepared, their minds focused entirely on the task ahead. The moment they arrived at the system, the Seraphim dropped out of hyperspace and immediately cloaked itself, the scanners scanning for any sign of the Imperial fleet. It didn't take long for the first signs of Imperial patrols to appear, tiny ships darting through the void like ants in a colony, unaware of the approaching predator. Samus smirked as he activated the ship's weapon systems. "We hit them fast and hard," Summers said, his voice low. "We don't give them a chance to regroup." Lilith's expression didn't change, but her eyes gleamed with anticipation. She was already calculating the fastest route to destroy their enemies. She was the first to move, as always slipping from her seat, and toward the armory her movements fluid and calm. Within moments, the seraphim had dropped out of its cloaking field and entered the fray. Summers's hands was steady as he fired the ship's weapons, tearing through the first line of Imperial defenses with surgical precision. The station in the distance erupted into flames as the Blackstone's attacks hit home. The Imperial forces didn't even know what hit them. They were being picked off, one by one, without mercy or hesitation. Summers directed the ship with cold efficiency, weaving through the debris and explosions. As Lilith picked off targets with lethal accuracy from her position, she never missed, not once, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. "Keep them disoriented," Summers ordered, his voice calm as always. "We'll take down their command ship next." The Blackstones moved through the battlefield like a storm, every move executed flawlessly. The chaos they created had Imperial forces in full retreat, their fleets scattered and vulnerable. It wasn't long before the Blackstones reached the heart of Vorik's power, the command ship, an enormous vessel bristling with weapons and defenses. But to Summers and Lilith, it was just another target, just another piece of the Empire to be destroyed. And as they prepared to board the command ship and finish the job, they knew that every victory like this brought them one step closer to bringing the Empire to its knees, but also that every victory meant more enemies in the shadows, waiting to strike back harder and faster. "There's no end to this," Summers muttered as the command ship loomed large before them, but Lilith simply nodded, her face cold and unreadable. "No end," she agreed, "but we're ready." And with that, the Blackstones prepared to board their next target, moving into the depths of Imperial space, where blood would spill and death would follow in their wake. The Empire would never be the same again. The command ship loomed before them, its massive hull bristling with weapons and armor, a fortress in space, meant to crush any who dared oppose the Empire. But Summers and Lilith didn't flinch. They had faced worse and emerged victorious. They were hunters, and the hunt was about to get much more personal. Summers guided the Seraphim through the chaotic space battle they had created with their surprise attack. Imperial ships were scrambling to respond to the destruction, but their confusion only played into the Blackstone's hands. With the enemy scattered and disoriented, Summers locked in on the command ship, his hands steady on the controls. "We'll board through the lower hangar bay," Summers said, his voice cold and calculating. "They'll be expecting an attack from the main entrance, so we'll slip past their defenses and take them from within." Lilith didn't answer. She didn't need to hurt. Every movement was a silent agreement as she readied her weapons with a deadly grace, every piece of her gear checked and rechecked, her eyes cold as ice, her face as emotionless as ever. She was a ghost in the chaos, a blade that would strike without mercy. The Seraphim dropped out of the chaos of the battle and slipped into the shadows of the command ship's hangar bay, its cloaking systems still intact. Summers guided the ship in carefully, his eyes scanning the hangar for any signs of movement, but it was quiet, too quiet, as if the Empire was waiting for them to make a move. The moment the ship touched down, Lilith was already up and moving toward the hatch, her boots making no sound as she approached the door. Summers followed close behind, his blaster in hand, both of them prepared for anything. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop now. The hatch opened and they moved into the ship's belly, the cold, sterile air of the command ship pressing in around them. They were in enemy territory now, and every step had to be calculated. Summers led the way, taking point as they moved down the narrow hallways of the vessel, the faint hum of machinery their only companion. They encountered no resistance at first, which only made the tension worse. Summers's instincts were razor-sharp. Something was wrong. The Empire didn't leave this much of their ship undefended. They had to be walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. They pushed forward with the same cold determination that had brought them this far. As they reached the central command room, the silence was broken by the sudden roar of Imperial soldiers rushing from the shadows, their weapons drawn. They had been waiting for them. The Blackstones had been expected, but they were ready for that too. Summers didn't hesitate as he fired his blaster, his aim true, as always each shot taking down an Imperial soldier before they could even react. Lilith was beside him in a heartbeat, her blade flashing as she moved through the soldiers like a phantom, cutting them down with surgical precision. Her strikes never missed, always lethal. She was a shadow in the darkness, moving faster than the eye could follow. But the Imperial forces weren't ordinary soldiers. They were elite. They came at the Blackstones in ways, every move a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm and trap them. But Samus and Lilith were never overwhelmed. They never faltered as they tore through the ranks with brutal efficiency. The sound of blaster fire and the thud of bodies hitting the floor was all that could be heard as they cut their way through the command room. Then they reached their target, the bridge, where Vorik himself was waiting, his face twisted in fury and fear, his hands gripping the controls of the ship as he tried to rally his forces, but it was too late. Samus stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "It's over, Vorik," he said as he leveled his blaster at the officer's chest. "You and your empire are done." Vorik sneered, but there was no confidence left in his expression. He knew it was over. "You think you've won?" He spat. "There's more to the Empire than you can imagine. The Emperor will crush you both." Samus' eyes narrowed. "The Emperor won't save you," he said coldly before firing his blaster. The shot rang out in the tense silence, and Vorik crumpled to the floor, his life snuffed out in an instant. Lilith stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room as the last of the Imperial soldiers fell. She didn't waste time with words. She simply moved to the controls and began transmitting a signal to the Blackstone's ship. The mission was complete, but the war was far from over. As Samus looked out at the burning remnants of the ship, he felt the weight of what they had done. It was another victory, but there was always more to fight for, more to destroy, and with each success the Empire's retaliation would grow more vicious, more desperate. But the Blackstones were ready. The galaxy was on fire, and they were the ones stoking the flames. The Seraphim soared through the wreckage of the Imperial command ship, its sleek form cutting through the debris like a predator hunting in the wild. Samus and Lilith were silent now, the gravity of their mission sinking in. They had taken down Vorik and his fleet, but they knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would retaliate with even more ferocity, and the Blackstones were preparing themselves for the next battle. Lilith sat in the co-pilot's seat, her fingers dancing over the console as she ran a diagnostic check on the ship. Samus stood at the window, staring out into the vast emptiness of space, his thoughts distant and heavy. There was no satisfaction in their victories, only the certainty of more bloodshed to come. "Where to next?" Lilith asked, her voice breaking the silence. Samus turned to her, his face unreadable. "We've hit 2 of their key figures, but there's more to do," he said, his voice low and grim. "The Empire won't stop until we're dead, but we can't stop either. We keep moving forward. We keep hitting them where it hurts." Lilith nodded, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. "We'll need to hit their supply lines, next disrupt their ability to reinforce their forces. That's where the heart of their power lies." Samus agreed, his mind already working through their next move. "We'll take out their fuel depots first, then their manufacturing plants. It'll cripple their ability to move their forces or rebuild their fleets." He paused, his eyes flicking over to Lilith. "We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we make sure they don't know what's coming until it's too late." The Seraphim walked into the deep recesses of Imperial space, and Samus and Lilith prepared for their next assault. They had no illusions about what they were doing. They weren't liberating planets or saving innocent lives. They were striking at the heart of an empire built on cruelty and oppression, and they wouldn't stop until it crumbled to dust. The first target was a large fuel depot located on the moon of a barren planet. The Imperial presence there was heavy, but not enough to stop the Blackstones. They moved in under the cover of darkness, their ship cloaked and silent, as they made their way toward the heart of the depot. Samus and Lilith landed on the surface and immediately began to work their way toward the core of the facility, a heavily guarded area filled with Imperial soldiers and automated defenses. But the Blackstones had no fear of numbers. They had learned long ago that strength meant nothing without precision and strategy. Lilith took the lead, moving like a shadow through the compound, her eyes scanning every corner, every potential hiding spot as she cleared the area with deadly efficiency. Summers followed closely behind, cutting down any soldier who dared to get in their way, his blaster cutting through the air with deadly accuracy as he moved with a predator's grace. They reached the central fuel storage tank and Summers set the charges while Lilith kept watch, her senses alert to any movement in the distance. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, but they were too late. The Blackstones were already gone before they could even react. The explosion rocked the planet's surface, sending a shockwave that reverberated through the sky. The fuel depot was gone in an instant, a massive inferno that consumed everything in its path. The Blackstones didn't wait to watch the destruction. They were already moving on to the next target. "Next stop," Summers muttered as the Seraphim lifted off and made its way toward the next system. "We hit their manufacturing plants and make sure they never build another fleet." The mission was already unfolding perfectly, but Summers knew the Empire would be closing in soon. They had made too much noise, and it was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived to hunt them down. But for now, they were untouchable. The Blackstones were a storm of destruction, and the galaxy was about to feel their fury again. "We're not done yet," Lilith said quietly as they sailed through the stars, the next battle waiting just beyond the horizon, and the Empire had no idea what was coming for them. The Seraphim cut through the stars once more, its engines humming steadily as Summers and Lilith prepare for their next mission. The manufacturing plants were crucial to the Empire's war machine. If they could destroy them, it would set the Imperial forces back for months, maybe even years. But Summers knew that they were playing a dangerous game. The deeper they ventured into Imperial space, the more enemies they would make, the more forces would be sent to hunt them. But the Blackstones didn't care. They had never feared the storm, only embraced it. They arrived at their target system, a desolate cluster of planets with a series of heavily fortified Imperial manufacturing facilities that churned out weapons and ships for the Empire's war effort. Each planet had its own set of defenses and a small fleet stationed above it to protect the production lines. "We'll need to hit them all at once," Summers said, his voice sharp as he analyzed the star maps displayed on the console. "If we take them out one by one, they'll reinforce and regroup. We need to overwhelm them fast and destroy their ability to rebuild." Lilith studied the map with a practiced eye. The factories are spread out across 3 planets. The most heavily fortified is on the 3rd planet. We'll hit the first 2 simultaneously, create confusion, and slip past their fleet before they can mount a defense. Then we go for the big one. Summers nodded, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Exactly, we create a storm and let it sweep them away." They launched the assault with surgical precision, first hitting the outer 2 planets in quick succession, disabling their production lines and causing chaos on the ground. Summers and Lilith landed on each planet, in turn their silent movements cutting down soldiers as they worked to sabotage the factories and destroy critical infrastructure with ruthless efficiency. No one was spared as they cut their way through the heart of the Empire's operations. On the first planet, Summers planted explosives along the manufacturing lines, while Lilith disabled the power grids and communication systems. Their plan was simple but effective. They left no trace, no chance for the Empire to recover or even understand what had happened until it was too late. The explosions rang out across the planet, shattering the Imperial strongholds and reducing the factories to rubble in an instant. Summers and Lilith didn't stop to watch the destruction. They were already moving on to the next target, always ahead of the curve, always leaving the Empire in their wake. On the second planet, the Blackstones used the same strategy, slipping past defenses with ease. They were ghosts moving through the night. Each step, deliberate, each kill, clean. The soldiers they encountered were no match for the precision and brutality of the Blackstones, and by the time the first wave of reinforcements arrived, the factories were already burning. But it was the 3rd planet that was the true challenge, the final target, and the most heavily defended. Summers and Lilith knew they would have to move fast, strike hard, and eliminate all threats quickly. They couldn't afford to be caught by the full force of the Imperial fleet that waited above the planet. They boarded the Seraphim once more and made their way toward the heart of the planet's defenses. The Imperial fleet was massive and well-coordinated, but Samus had no intention of playing by their rules. They activated the ship's cloaking systems and slipped through the Imperial patrols undetected until they were right on top of their target. As they descended toward the planet's surface, Samus tapped into the Seraphim's weapon systems and prepared to launch the final assault. "This is it," he said, his voice low and focused. "We disable the fleet and cripple the factory in one shot." Lilith's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable, but her body language betrayed no hint of hesitation. She was ready to unleash destruction on the Empire once more. The Blackstones hit hard and fast, disabling the fleet's communication systems and causing chaos among the Imperial forces. As the Seraphim tore through the skies above the factory, they launched a series of devastating strikes, hitting the central reactor and setting off a chain of explosions that engulfed the planet in a fiery inferno. The factory was obliterated in seconds, its workers and soldiers caught in the blast as the entire facility crumbled to the ground. But the Blackstones didn't wait to see the aftermath. They were already on the move, slipping back into the shadows as the planet burned behind them. "We've done it," Samus said, his voice steady, but there was no satisfaction in his words, only the weight of what came next. Lilith didn't speak, but her gaze locked onto the stars ahead of them as they disappeared into the void. The Empire would come for them soon, they could feel it in their bones. But they had no fear. They had never feared the Empire. They were the Blackstones, and the galaxy was their hunting ground. "There's always more to do," Samus muttered as he set course for the next target. But they both knew that the Empire would never stop coming, and neither would they. The stars stretched out before them like an endless sea as the Seraphim coasted silently through the vast emptiness. Samus and Lilith knew the galaxy had shifted after their latest strike. The Empire was reeling, its fleets scattered, its defenses crippled. But the fight was far from over. It had only just begun. Samus stared at the stars, his mind racing with what lay ahead. The Empire would take its time to regroup, but when they came for the Blackstones, they would be prepared. "We've left a scar on the Empire," Samus said, his voice low and steady as he gazed at the navigation screen. "But scars fade over time. They'll rebuild faster than we expect, and they'll come after us with everything they've got." Lilith's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable, as always, her fingers moving over the console as she checked their current location. "We don't wait for them to come," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with the promise of violence. "We go to them, we strike again before they have the chance to regroup." Samus looked at her, and for a moment he saw the same fire in her eyes, the same hunger for destruction that had driven them this far. "You're right," he said with a dark grin. "We make sure they never get comfortable again." The Blackstones were already moving again, heading deeper into Imperial territory toward another key target, a planetary defense station that guarded one of the Empire's main trade routes. Cutting it off would disrupt their supply lines and prevent reinforcements from reaching the front lines, where the Blackstones had already torn apart two fleets. As the Seraphim moved closer to their target, Samus and Lilith prepared themselves for the final strike. They knew the Empire's defenses would be waiting for them this time, and they wouldn't be able to rely on stealth alone. It would be a full-on assault, and they would need to move fast and hit hard. The station loomed ahead, a massive structure that stretched across the sky like a jagged wound in the heavens. Its defenses were formidable, its weaponry enough to make even the Blackstones think twice. But neither Samus nor Lilith had ever been known to back down from a challenge, and this would be no different. Samus tapped the controls and cloaked the Seraphim, slipping it past the first line of defenses like a whisper in the night. Lilith was already preparing for the ground assault, her eyes gleaming with cold intent as she ran through the details of their plan. When they finally made their move, it was with the force of a storm. They tore through the station's outer defenses in minutes, the alarms blaring as they cut through the soldiers and automated defenses like a blade through butter. Samus and Lilith moved in tandem, each one anticipating the other's moves as they cleared the station with ruthless efficiency. It didn't take long for the station's command to realize what was happening, but by the time they mobilized, it was already too late. The Blackstones had already reached the heart of the station, and with a single command Samus sent the signal to detonate the charges that would tear the station apart from the inside out. The explosions rang out deafening and violent as the station began to crumble under the weight of their attack. The screams of the Imperial officers and soldiers were swallowed by the chaos as the structure tore itself apart. As the station disintegrated around them, Samus and Lilith stood amidst the destruction, their eyes scanning the wreckage, their mission complete. But their work far from done. They were unstoppable now that enemies were scattered and their reputation had become a legend. "We've done it again," Samus said, his voice cold and satisfied as he surveyed the carnage. But there was no triumph in his eyes, only the hunger for more destruction. Lilith turned to him, her expression still unreadable, but her body language spoke volumes. "We're far from finished," she said, her voice steady as she glanced toward the next system in the distance. "This war won't end until the Empire is nothing but ashes." Samus nodded, his eyes locked on the stars ahead of them. As the Seraphim made its way deeper into the heart of the galaxy, the Blackstones were just getting started, and the Empire's reign was about to face its most brutal and relentless enemy yet. "We'll burn it all down," Samus muttered under his breath as they disappeared into the darkness of space. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, and it wouldn't survive the storm the Blackstones were about to unleash.